Hey everybody, I've been wanting to make this video for a while. It's very hard for me to make videos because my house is rarely quiet. My son is sleeping right now, so I'm going to try to make as much of this as possible. So Romney put out these 59 points of things that he wanted to do for the nation. And they're kind of grouped into categories. And so other than do 59 points all in one video, which would take forever, I'm going to kind of break them down into categories. So this first video will cover basically Romney's tax plan and what he plans to do about taxes. Now the first point that Romney has basically discusses maintaining current tax rates on personal income. For those of you who don't understand what that means that it would keep the Bush tax cuts in place. For example, the Bush tax cuts, which were supposed to create jobs back in the Bush administration, but never did, they would become permanent. So the revenue that the government is already losing, because we're already in debt, would then escalate from, basically losing additional revenue throughout the years. So it would do nothing to help us get out of debt. It would do nothing really to create jobs because it hadn't created jobs before. In fact, we lost jobs because we weren't investing in infrastructure. We weren't investing like we used to because we didn't have the money to. In addition to not creating jobs, these tax cuts would also deplete funds in other areas that the federal government supports. Public schools, public roads, like I said before. And so we would get less people working because less people would have government jobs. And also there would be less services provided by the government. So the roads and bridges that desperately need to be repaired wouldn't be repaired. And of course there'd be less money to public schools. A good majority of our kids use the public schools. Even if you favor homeschooling for your own kids or private schools for your own kids, the necessity of having a good public school system permeates all these different areas of society, because our education system, having a good education system for all kids, basically helps us guarantee that all kids can get a leg up and become successful. Without that public school system being a good system for all kids, then you've got gaps of people who are not able to reach the next levels of society and essentially just stay in the lower class and stay dependent on the government. And so you're basically creating more debt for the government by not investing in the right areas of society. And public education is one of those areas where everybody needs to be on board with investing more in public education. Our public education is declining greatly, and we need to invest much more than we are now. But under Romney, especially because he has supported the Ryan budget plan, we know that he plans on investing less in education. So the next thing that Romney wants to do, his second point, is to maintain tax rates on capital gains, dividends, and interest, which is no surprise if you know that Romney makes his money that way. He released his tax return for this year that said that he only paid 13.9% taxes. And, that's partially because he made charitable donations and had deductions and things like that, and so he only had to pay he paid less than 15% of his income in taxes. Now, a lot of people say this is because of the risk that people take when they invest. Well, that may be for somebody like you and me that invests. If we make a $20,000 investment and you make $50,000 a year, that's a big risk, right? But for somebody like Romney to make a $20,000 investment, it's like paying 20 bucks to somebody. It's nothing. There's no risk involved. So I personally think that the tax rate for people making over $1 million a year should be higher because they don't have any risk involved in their investments and there's no work involved in it. And obviously, the people who have that type of money, who make those investments, have benefited off of our economy more so than other people, and thus they should put more back into the economy. But if you look at the statistics, and I'll post that below, you could see that people who make over $1 million a year, so that the top 2%, they do not invest in the economy like the middle and lower classes do, and so thus people who make less than $1 million a year should get a lower tax rate, and they should not get the same tax rate as people who make over $1 million a year who don't have the same risk. Because middle and lower class people invest more of their money back into the economy, and they also make bigger risks when they go to work and when they invest. So there you go. Now the third point is to completely eliminate capital gains taxes and investment taxes, essentially, for people who make less than $200,000 a year. Obviously, it sounds good, especially for those people who want to invest. And I think that certain investments, like investments that create jobs, if you're starting your own small business and stuff like that, you should get not only tax credits from the government, but also you should get grants from the governments too. I believe that. But when it comes to just like investing, in the stock market, and getting capital gains and stuff like that, I do not think that you should be able to do that tax free. Because if you did, then you would just it would basically allow people to game the system too much. It would encourage people to hide money to stay under that tax bracket, and for several other reasons. There are people who would try to cheat the system to get down to that zero number, and I think that it's just too much um, of an incentive, so to speak. And not only that, I'm not sure how he's going to pay for something like that. In addition to the idea of it being too easy for people to cheat, how is he going to pay for all that lost revenue to our federal coffers, essentially? Well, the only way he can do it is by cutting federal programs, and so we'll get more federal jobs laid off. Medicaid will, like Paul Ryan wants to do, is going to be block granted back to the states. And Medicare will be turned into a voucher system, so you'll have a certain amount of money that you can spend, and for people who are really, really ill, that basically screws them over. And because they also want to repeal Obamacare, you won't be able to. You'll have lifetime limits on other insurances and things like that too, so you can be essentially die from your lack of insurance. Um, so I mean, essentially, he's going to pay for this tax credit by screwing over all these different government programs. And education is definitely going to be one of those. So if your kids go to public school, you can see them have larger class sizes of 50 or more students, no teacher's aides, so there'll be one teacher to a classroom. They won't be able to afford the special ed or IEP programs anymore. They'll encourage those kids to just get sent home. And I mean, we'll have a system that essentially doesn't allow people from the middle and lower classes to reach that upper echelon anymore. Which essentially just brings us one step closer to fascism. When you have a shrinking middle class like we do right now, programs like education, and when I mean education, I don't just mean, like public elementary and high schools. I'm also talking about the college programs, which are, tuitions going up every year. One of those reasons is because the federal government isn't putting more money into the public education program on the collegiate level either. So it'll be harder for your kids to go to school. And so you'll see a lot of people unable to go to school. You'll see veterans benefits cut so that veterans can't go to school, and a lot of other people going into either serious debt or just not able to achieve a college education because of these tax cuts. These tax cuts that are really unnecessary. The fourth thing on Romney's list is to eliminate the death tax. Now, there's a lot of people who say that there's no reason to tax someone's estate because essentially they've been paying taxes on it all along. But what you have to understand is that when somebody dies, and that means that money is going to go to other places. And so essentially, without having to pay a death tax, normally what happens is that money will go to inheritors. So you have a certain amount of kids, and you usually split it up amongst your kids, and so they essentially would then get all this tax-free money, right? Money that they didn't work for, and that they took no risk in. And so if you consider the fact that Romney wants to turn Medicaid into a voucher system, which for people who are really, really ill would extremely hurt them, they're going to die in debt, and then their family is going to have to pay off that debt. Now, the federal government does nothing, doesn't do much to help those people right now. But if we had more revenue, like things like the death tax, and actually I think it should be higher in certain instances, we could actually help turn that around so that the debts that are accrued by family members who die can get paid off and that people can actually bury their loved one without going into debt themselves. What really irks me is that the only argument to eliminate the death tax is, well, it's not fair, you know? Well, all of a sudden here you are playing the fair card when Republicans and Republican policies essentially um, enact so many things that are unfair for the middle and lower classes, but that doesn't matter. Put a tax on something that nobody earned and nobody took any risk for, that's living, that is, and all of a sudden you're playing the fair card. Now, number five, sounds like a good idea, but I'll explain to you why it's not. It says to pursue a conservative overhaul of the tax system over the long term that includes lower, flatter rates on a broader base. So, what does that mean? Lower, flatter rates. Okay, what it means is lower rates for the top 2% and higher rates for the people who right now they're saying pay no tax, the lower class that actually, gets their money back from their income tax because they make so little, they want to tax those people higher. And so it's going to be a higher burden on the lower classes and a less burden on the higher classes, the so-called job creators. Let's talk about who the real job creators are. Now, think about if you have a business, why it is that you feel the need to hire more people. Now, when people are buying more widgets, you need to hire more people to make the widgets, more people to test the widgets, more people to ship the widgets, to sell the widgets. And so you need more people for your company. But you're not going to hire those people just because. You hire them because there's a greater demand for your product or service. And so, if they, hire UPS to ship the widgets, then UPS is going to hire more people to ship them. But what you need first in order for that to happen is demand. And demand comes from a healthy middle class and from a shrinking lower class. That's where demand comes from. Now, the upper class people, those people usually benefit whether or not the economy is good or not. Those people are going to make money because they make money whether or not the rest of us do good. But they might do even better if, for example, the companies that they make more money and the companies that they invest in make more money. And so it's really more beneficial for the general welfare if we invest more to widen the middle class. How does that happen? By making sure that the middle class has a good education and can afford it, that they don't go into debt for paying for their education, that they have basically the ability to bring themselves up into the middle class or to bring themselves up into the upper class. Without federal programs, you don't have the ability to do that. And so you have a separation from the upper classes and everybody else. And that's basically what Romney wants. He wants lower taxes for the rich and higher taxes for the lower class, which makes it even harder for the lower class to make it to the middle class, which means you have a shrinking middle class. Now, the sixth item on Romney's list talks about reducing corporate tax rates to 25%. Now, Obama had a similar plan, actually. But the difference is that Obama wants to give those tax rates to companies who are bringing jobs to the United States. And I agree that corporations, no matter what size, if they're creating good jobs, not minimum wage jobs, good jobs with a good wage, that they should be rewarded for that. But if you're not creating jobs, what is the whole job creators argument, raising taxes on job creators? Well, if they're actually creating jobs here, I have no problem with them having less taxes. But if they're not, if they're sending their jobs overseas, we should hire their taxes, There should be tax penalties. For each job that you send overseas, there should be tax penalties. For each high wage job that you replace with a minimum wage job, you should get higher taxes on that because you're essentially sending more people into the lower class and making them more more dependent on federal programs. One of the reasons we have so many people on food stamps right now is because there's so many jobs going over to overseas to China or wherever else the jobs are going. But, if you're just rewarding all corporations without any kind of contingency on whether or not they create jobs here or not, then you're not rewarding job creators. You're just giving people a tax break, for no really good reason. And so that's what Romney wants to do. And how is he going to pay for it again? He has to pay for it by cutting federal programs. And he's going to cut federal programs that benefit everybody. Number 7 is the icing on the cake when it comes to Romney's tax plan. Okay, this is how he's getting all these corporations to give him money. Okay, he wants to pursue a territorial instead of a worldwide tax system. So essentially, any profits that a company from the U.S. makes overseas, he doesn't think the U.S. should tax that. He doesn't think that, even though their headquarters is here and they're a U.S. company and they take advantage of U.S. laws, they shouldn't be taxed on their profits overseas. For somebody like him, who obviously has a lot invested in overseas companies, that would be great. Think about the enormous loss to our federal revenue for that, number 1. Number 2, think about how would that affect what companies send jobs overseas and send different services overseas. It would encourage people to make more money overseas and therefore send more jobs overseas. So it would hurt not just our federal revenue, but it would also hurt the American people. It would hurt the middle class because there would be less and less jobs. It would be devastating. Essentially they could leave the U.S. altogether. They could keep their headquarters here, but make all their profits overseas, and then they wouldn't get taxed.